Hello, good evening, and welcome to Hindsight with me, Segun Ojumu. We apologize, we're starting a little behind schedule, but we'll try and take as much as we can on the program today. Now, let's talk about the Paris Climate Change Agreement. This past week, world leaders were in Morocco to show strong support for the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said during the opening of the high-level segment of the 22nd Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, that the 196 countries who have signed the deal did so because they realized their own national interest is best secured by pursuing the common good. What is left, according to him, is how to translate words into effective policies and actions. He goes on to say that this action is critical to protect the planet, safeguard the most vulnerable, and drive shared prosperity. Low-emission development and climate resilience will also advance all the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. But ultimately, achieving the targets set will cost money. Let's give you a little more on what Mr. Ban said in Marrakesh.
On developed countries to honor their commitment to mobilize climate finance $100 billion by 2020 to help developing countries to mitigate and adapt to climate vulnerability.
President Barack Obama could not be in Marrakesh. He was on what was his final overseas trip to Europe and then to South America. He sent his Secretary of State, John Kerry, to represent him there. But Mr. Kerry went to Marrakesh to meet world leaders who were worried by the statement from Donald Trump. The then presidential candidate promised if elected, he will pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement. Take a listen.
My presidency will accomplish a complete American energy independence. Complete. President Obama entered the United States into the Paris Climate Accords unilaterally and without the permission of Congress. This agreement gives foreign bureaucrats control over how much our energy and how much we use right here in America. So foreign bureaucrats are going to be controlling what we're using and what we're doing on our land in our country. No way. No way. We're going to cancel the Paris Climate Agreement and stop. Unbelievable. And stop all payments of the United States tax dollars to UN global warming programs.
But Mr. Kerry, during the conference, tried to allay the fears of world leaders. Let's give you a sense of what Mr. Kerry said.
Has a right to make decisions that affect billions of people based on solely ideology or without proper input. Anyone who has these conversations, who takes the time to learn from these experts, who gets the full picture of what we're facing, I believe they can only come to one legitimate decision, and that is to act boldly on climate change and encourage others to do the same. Now, I want to acknowledge that since this COP started, obviously an election took place in my country. And I know it has left some here and elsewhere feeling uncertain about the future. I obviously understand that uncertainty. And while I can't stand here and speculate about what policies our president-elect will pursue, I will tell you this: in the time that I have spent in public life, one of the things I have learned is that some issues look a little bit different when you're actually in office compared to when you're on the campaign trail. And the truth is that climate change shouldn't be a partisan issue in the first place. It isn't a partisan issue for our military leaders at the Pentagon, who call climate change a threat multiplier. It isn't a partisan issue for those military leaders because of the way that climate change exacerbates conflicts all over the world, and who view it as a threat to military readiness at their bases and could suffer the consequences of rising seas and stronger storms.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry there speaking in Marrakesh, Morocco. Now, after the break, we'll be taking a look at a matter which represents a global health concern. Find out what that is. Stay with us. Welcome back, and if you're just joining us, this is Hindsight. Now, according to United Nations program on HIV/AIDS or UNAIDS, despite progress made in HIV/AIDS response, young people, especially young women and girls, continue to be disproportionately affected by HIV. In 2014, over 3 million young people between the ages of 15 to 24 were living with HIV. More than 600,000 became newly infected, and AIDS became the leading cause of death among young people in Africa. And that's not all. In fact, the stats are grimmer for young women and girls. There are 300,000 new HIV infections occurring annually. I have with me in the studio to talk more about this, and I'm being joined by Kemi Gbadamosi. She is the PR and communications for AHF Nigeria. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Kemi. Now, the statistics are very grim to say the least. Yeah. But what do you have to say about this?
The truth is, the statistics are actually, they say numbers don't lie, or data do not lie at all. And that's because part of the work we do in HIV/AIDS is also to monitor and evaluate programs and their progress, strategies and inventions at different levels, both at national, regional, and even at global level. And the truth is, for young women and girls, it's been a huge source of concern now more than ever, because globally we talk about achieving an AIDS-free generation where you no longer have new infections with respect to HIV. But unfortunately, when we look at the statistics that we have, when we look at young people, especially young women and girls, we discover that they keep picking up new HIV infections. And now the challenge with achieving an AIDS-free generation is that if we continue to have that cycle, we will never get there. And so it's actually a huge problem, one that the global community is very aware of. Even nationally, we're also aware of it. And I'm sure if you look around, you see a lot of activities and interventions, engagements, and even participation of young people, especially young women and girls, because we say when it comes to HIV, you need to put them at the center if we're going to make any progress at all. Okay,
before we get into some of those interventions, don't let the cat out of the bag yet. Now, ages 15 to 24, why this particular age group? Why are they worst affected?
Okay, I'll say largely when you look at 15 to 24 now, when a young woman or a young person starts to attain, you have when you enter your teenage years, when you become very experimental, when there's a lot of peer influence and peer pressure, especially now that when you look around us, you see a lot with respect to technology, information, access to information that generally back in the day you probably wouldn't have access to. Now you have that. And so you have, again, when you also look at areas where you have things like child marriage, you look at cases where young people are giving off in marriage, you look at female genital mutilation, you look at all those, when you look at that bracket, and that's actually the bracket that are in school. Unfortunately, for areas where there are like wars or terrorist outbreaks and things like that, those same group of people, or the young women and girls, are the ones that are usually out of school. And let's not forget that globally, when we look at the world as a whole, we discover that a lot of factors work against young women and girls. When we look at gender inequalities across the board, you have more boys in schools than you have girls. You have girls being married off as very early age of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And then you also have cases where there are either wars or terrorist issues. They get raped or sexual violated.
Violence.
Exactly. So it's like a chain of a vicious cycle, coupled with the fact that there's a saying that the odds are usually against you as a woman or as a girl. But now the truth is, global organizations, national organizations, and CSOs are working to see that issues around gender equality, issues around equal opportunity for girls in terms of education. And let's not forget now that when you don't have access to education, you're very limited in terms of your ability to make informed choices, in terms of being able to make decisions, and that includes decisions about your health. And when we look at issues around sexual reproductive health, you discover that young women and girls actually, that same age bracket is where you have, that's where you make some of the decisions, either as a young person growing up, so those are some of the factors that actually affect that age group, and we keep having it. And there's also something we call the sugar daddy syndrome. That's another kettle of fish entirely. But it boils down to issues around transactional
Yeah, I was going to ask you how we can stem the tide of these infections. You mentioned education. That I know with education, you said they can make informed choices. But what other areas of interventions are you looking at to stem this tide?
Okay. Another thing that I'd like to see before I actually go to that question again is, we also have young people who are living with HIV.
Sure.
Either because they were born
that way.
And a lot of times as they grow up and want to go into relationships, there's usually that fear or that, issues around self-esteem. So a lot of times they don't disclose even to their boyfriends or to their girlfriends.
Their status.
That's another thing that contributes. And then these young people start to experiment sexually, and it continues. So basically, some of the interventions that we're trying to do is like what AHF is doing with Girls Act. And the Girls Act is just the Girls Awareness Campaign Tour, which is a dynamic way of reaching young women and girls. If you look around, we don't have as many youth-friendly centers as we used to have back in the day. And a lot of young people will tell you they can't go to a facility for fear of being judged. You can't walk into a facility and say, I want to ask about I want to just ask about sexual reproductive health. I want to ask more about what do I need to know in case I want to have sex.
There's still so much taboo around it.
So much taboo. And it's not like we do preach abstinence. That's the #1 preaching for young people. But at the same time, we need to balance that out because there's still young people who are engaging in sexual activities. So how about we balance that out? So what we're trying to do with the Girls Act is to use something that is fun, something that's entertaining, something that sparks participation of young people. Young people want to lead their own response. They don't want you telling them what to do. You and I know that when we were much younger, you didn't really want anyone telling you what to do.
You knew it all.
Exactly.
Also
so that exactly. So you see, that's the thing. We want to have youth-led processes where young people create activities. And that was what AHF did with partners and even young people. We brought them to the table. What are the issues? What can we do differently? So the Girls Act is more like a caravan kind of campaign, but then there will be services such as menstrual hygiene, personal hygiene, sexual reproductive health, psychosocial support, legal aid for those who have probably suffered sexual or gender-based violence, at least to be able to talk to someone on what the next line, what can they do to probably get rehabilitation. There will also be HIV screening and STI as well, using fun things, not the typical routines that we have that we know that they will never access. I rarely see young people. I work with an organization that has a facility, so I rarely see young people that age walking in to want to get tested.
Okay, there's so many questions I would like to ask, but of course there's also the issue of stigma. Now, what do you have to say about this? Is the stigma attached? Are we seeing a reduction in stigma, or is it still a big factor?
Stigma is still a big factor, in as much as yes, we've made some progress, but it's still a huge factor, especially for young people. Young people actually suffer a lot of stigma. We've had cases where we've had safe space programs with young people, not just young women and girls, even young boys too, especially the ones who are living positive. And some of them will tell you that even in school, even in school, their classmates don't know. They're afraid to tell their teachers because the moment you do that, you're shut out of school. And the truth is, we still have stigma, even in schools, even in churches. And we need to, we also have stigma in families as well. So you have a lot of young people who are taking medication, but one, do not know why they're taking the medication. Two, the ones who know actually hide it from their other siblings.
Sad.
So these are things that we need to start to address. And we've talked about engaging even guardians and parents of children living with HIV in the discourse, in the intervention. They also need support as well, you know, on what to do and how to maneuver raising a teenager who is HIV positive and is going to be on medication for the rest of their lives. So it has to be a holistic approach to address stigma, not just focusing on the healthcare facilities, but we also have to focus on family stigma. We also have to focus on schools, churches, and mosques as well, because these are areas where you have stigma happening.
Kemi, it's been amazing talking to you. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but I'm sure we can find time to bring you on the show again.
Of course.
That's how much we can take for now. Thank you, but that's all we can take for now. Please, let's keep the conversation going. Go online on Twitter, tweet us, and we'll tweet you right back at Hindsight STV, or email us at hindsightsilverbird@gmail.com. Till I come your way again next time, I am Shegun Ojumu from me and the rest of the team. See you again next week.